Hello, and welcome to my channel. Today, I will be discussing my ranking for the Cosmere books by Brandon Sanderson. I should start this by saying that I really do enjoy all of Brandon Sanderson's novels. In fact, all of his Cosmere books have received more than a 9 out of 10 in some form or fashion. I use a decimal point system, like a 9.0 or a 9.2 or whatever. All of his books have received more than a 9.0 because they are all so good and I enjoy them so much. Brandon Sanderson is my favorite fantasy author, and his books are on my list of favorite fantasy series. We're going to see what my ranking is if I show that. So I really want to communicate that just because a book is lower on the series does not mean I don't think it's good. It just means that I enjoyed some of his other books better. And so to begin this video, I have some honorable mentions and also a list of Brandon's books in the Cosmere that I have not yet read. This is simply because I just haven't gotten there yet. So I want to start out by discussing the ones I haven't read. I have not yet read Rhythm of War, which is the biggest and latest book in the Stormlight Archive series. I will be reading it soon. I started reading the Stormlight Archive around the time Rhythm of War was released, and I just wasn't ready for it yet. I was kind of tired of huge books and needed a bit of a break. So that's why I have not started it yet. I have also not yet read Edge Dancer, Dawn Shard, or Mistborn Secret History, any of those novellas, or even anything else from the novella collection, Arcanum Unbounded. I have read one of them, one story from that, which does make it onto my list, and that is a novella by the name of The Emperor's Soul, and I'll get to that in a second. But other than that, I haven't really read any of his novellas or short stories, so that's why you won't see them on this list. Maybe one day in the future, when I've read more of his books, I will put more on my list, but for now, I'm not. So, to begin with, I'm going to discuss my two honorable mentions. My first honorable mention is Shadows of Self, and my second one is Bands of Mourning. I'm going to talk about these together because they really do go well together. These are books 2 and 3 of the Wax and Wane series from Mistborn. And the reason these are the lowest on my list is not, again, I didn't think they were bad. I highly loved them, but these didn't have the heart and soul that the other books had for me. The reason that Brandon is catapulted into the #1 spot for me is not his world building or his magic or his plot or anything like that. It is character and themes. And while character is developed well in here, I don't think themes are that well developed. And so that's why Bands of Mourning and Shadows of Self are my two honorable mentions. Again, I think they're great books. I just think that they're the lowest on Sanderson's list. So now I'm going to get into my top 10 for Brandon Sanderson. The number 10 on my list is Oathbringer. Now, this one is kind of interesting. One, it's markedly longer than some of the others. Oathbringer is the third book in the Stormlight Archive. This book has an incredible middle act. Even though it drags at points, the themes developed with Shallan, with Dalinar, with the flashbacks are incredible in this book. I really enjoyed them, and there were points where the flashbacks were more exciting than the main part of the novel. The reason that this is lower than the other two Stormlight Archive books is because Brandon makes decisions in this book that I didn't particularly like. Brandon, he usually does characters and themes in a way that I really like. He usually ends in a place that I'm happy for him to end, and occasionally he doesn't. And this is one of those books where there were just some character things that maybe I'll make a spoiler video one day, but the character stuff in this one just frustrated me. But it did have some great themes, which I did appreciate, and it also had some great plot and action some of the best action in the whole series. Another reason this is pretty low on my list comparatively is because I felt that the climax was just too long. The climax of this book is like 300 pages. It's 300 pages of epic battle. And while it's great at one way to make it feel huge, at the same time, it is kind of tiring, it is kind of exhausting, and it could have been cut a little bit, I think. Or he could have split those scenes up over a longer period of the book. Book 9 on my list, I don't have a physical copy of, so I'm just going to point, and that is going to be The Emperor's Soul. The Emperor's Soul is a novella set in the world of Elantris, and this novella was really interesting because it's Brandon Sanderson writing something so short. And while the magic system just was a bit different than some of the Elantris magic system, the world it's set in, it was still so fascinating, some of the themes that he developed, and you really feel for the characters in just that short period of time. It was a very interesting decision to have the prologue and the last chapter from different characters' perspectives, and then have the main story from another character's perspective. It's a really short read, but I think it is very entertaining. The next book on my list, going up, so this will be my number 8, is The Hero of Ages. This is book 3 in the Mistborn trilogy. I highly loved this trilogy when I first read it. I read them all in back-to-back months. I was super excited to get to read this book. The first 2 books hit it out of the park, and I thought this one did too. This one is a much more tragic book than the first 2, and I don't particularly love tragic books, but the themes in this one are most excellent. The character of Sazed has the best lines in this series, and if you go to my Goodreads and you look at the quotes that I've highlighted, they're almost all from Brandon Sanderson, and they're almost all from Sazed in these books, because he just has so many good, meaty one-liners in these books. And this book is no different. And this book fixed stuff that it didn't like in the first 2 books. It also did stuff I didn't want. And so it kind of had its own problems. Biggest issue with the book is the ending is just kind of sad, and it makes sense, but it's still kind of sad. And I don't like having to read sad endings, but it's still a masterfully done book. The next book on my list is the first Wax and Wayne book, Alloy of Law. This is going to be a controversial opinion to have this so much higher than the other 2, but this was my favorite of the Wax and Wayne books because it felt the most like a Sherlock Holmes detective mystery set in the Mistborn world, and that's what I think is the biggest draw, especially when you have good characters like Wayne and a good character like Wax, and you have Steris and you have Marasi, all great characters in the Wax and Wayne era. Wax and Wayne era, that's not a deficient area, but it shines when it is doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is just serving as a Sherlock Holmes kind of reference, and this one does that really well. The other books, Shadows of Self and Bands of Mourning, start to become more like a Mistborn novel. They become more like his other works, whereas this one stands out as feeling more like Sherlock Holmes, which is why I prefer this one to the others. Not that I don't like any of his series, but this one, it's just so unique that it stands out. And this cover, I love the cover design. I think this was a brilliant choice to go in this direction with the color scheme of the yellows and the whites and the blacks. Next book on my list, which will be my number 7, I believe. My number 6. Wow, I'm going along. Sorry. My number 6 is Well of Ascension. This one had so many scenes that had me going, There was so many great moments, so many just things that made me excited about this book. I really enjoyed the battle plans, and I enjoyed reading about how the armies were positioning. This book is a much bigger book than the first Mistborn book, and so it starts to set up so much. And this one, there was one scene in this book that catapulted it up for me. And it is a scene between Elend and Vin, kind of midway through the book. And when I read scenes like that, scenes that I could just reread and reread and reread. A comparable scene is the scene in Harry Potter where Dumbledore sits down with Harry after the death of Sirius Black. That scene I could read over and over and over. It is such a good scene, and this scene between Elend and Vin is very good as well. The ending's a bit weird, but I highly enjoyed it, and this book does not suffer from middle book syndrome at all. So I'm getting in my top 5, and this is probably my biggest faux pas No, it's not. This isn't my biggest faux pas. But people would disagree that I should put this so low. But my number 5 is The Way of Kings. This is the one that catapulted Sanderson in the fandom up because he wrote a huge, epic book, Wheel of Time level scale, bigger than Wheel of Time scale, bigger than Game of Thrones, and he did great work with Kaladin. The reason it's not higher is because there was some stuff with Kaladin that just felt like it dragged on too much, and it was just too sad for me. But the stuff with Shallan in this book is fantastic. The stuff with Dalinar in this book. I think that this one has some great action scenes in the present. It is better than Oathbringer in that I was more invested into the present than I was into Oathbringer's present in this book. So it does that really well. The storms are so vivid, I understood them. And so just the world building here was excellent as well. And so that's why it makes it into my number 5 on the list. And that climax, I've talked about sometimes not enjoying all of Sanderson's climax. This climax was brilliant. Completely, utterly brilliant. The next book on my list, my stack's getting a little large, is my number 4, which is Warbreaker. From here on out, these are all 10 out of 10s. These were all masterpieces, I think. Warbreaker is one of his standalone novels, and it just has some of the best themes. Sanderson goes into themes about religion. He goes into themes about sexuality. He goes into themes about romance. He goes into themes about political power. And he goes into themes about hard work and laziness. All of this is explored in this backdrop of this just bizarre idea of this girl having to marry a, quote, God King. And it's just so much fun to read. There are hilarious moments throughout. It has some great comic relief characters. It's got some great sweet heart in it. It's got an awesome climax. It's got some great questions that it asks. And this book is just like, there's very little in it I would change. I think that this is Sanderson pushing the envelope in all the best ways. It's very different than any of his other books. It's much more adult, but I very much appreciated it. All right, the number 3 on my list is Words of Radiance. This is my favorite of the Stormlight Archive books, and this book passed. I read it so quickly. I enjoyed it so much. Kaladin's arc in this book is what made me excited for more of the Stormlight Archive. Like, I enjoyed Kaladin's character, but this book sold me on Kaladin's character. And this book sold me on Dalinar even more, even though I liked him in the first book. And Adolin has some great moments, and Shallan and all the characters are just great in this book. One of the things that makes this book interesting is it finally brings them together. You're finally seeing Shallan part of interacting with Kaladin and with Adolin and others, and I just thought that this was very well done in that aspect. This book and also the Oathbringer start to do things with Shallan that are kind of tiring, and I understand that Rhythm of War has that, which makes me worried. Shallan's DID is a little bit frustrating to read, and I know that's why Sanderson wrote that. I just don't enjoy reading that, and so maybe it'll be more palatable in the way he writes it in Rhythm of War, but that has me a little bit nervous. But here, Shallan's written fantastically, and the humor is great, and the action, the climax, I don't know if the climax is better than the climax. No, it is. It is better than the climax of the Stormlight Archive, The Way of Kings. Fantastic climax. I highly enjoyed Words of Radiance. This is my number 2 for the series, my number 3, I should say, for the whole Cosmere. Then my number 2 book is Mistborn, the first one, also known as The Final Empire. This book, everything I love about it is spoilers, so I'm not going to go into those. But if you know what Elend does in the end of the book when he goes into the palace, you'll know I ate that story up. The last 2 pages of the book swung me from this is a great book to this is an amazing book. I loved the last 2 pages. And Brandon's themes here again with Sazed asking all these religious questions and also the political questions asked here, and the great action here. This one is much more tight action. It's a smaller scale. You're in the city of Luthadel, and it's just very tight. Vin's character, fantastic. She's a great protagonist. Elend is a great protagonist. There are others in this that are great. The humor with some of them is really good. Kelsier, of course, everyone loves Kelsier. And so I really, really enjoyed this one. And I wish I could talk about the spoilers for why I love this one, but I can't. Now for my number 1. I alluded earlier that I had a bigger faux pas than putting The Way of Kings number 5. My biggest faux pas that people will not like is that my number 1 is Elantris. Hear me out. I have many reasons. Themes here are the best themes that Brandon explores, in my opinion. This one, the magic system is unique, but it's a magic system that I can get behind and I really enjoy reading about. I love the political landscape of this one. I love the world. I love the characters. The characters of Raoden and Serene, and you have the villain in Hraithron, is great. I love the questions this book asks. This book, it deals with even more religious questions. It deals with more political questions. It is, and it's very interesting that it asks questions that we deal with today, such as the different sects of Christianity are dealt with in this fantasy realm. You have different types of why is a republic better than a monarchy, or why is a monarchy better than a republic? It's not expressly stated in that way, but they discuss this. Should you have a benevolent dictatorship? Should you not have a benevolent dictatorship? The questions asked in this book are just 10 out of 10. And the characters are great, and I literally would not change anything in this book. The other books, I have minor things, and then some pretty big things I would change. This one, I loved it cover to cover. And it is just the book I've reread. It's the it's the Cosmere novel I've reread the most. It's the fantasy novel I've reread the most. And I will continue to reread it so much because I just love it that much. This is one of those books I will reread every year because it is just always so good. No, that's controversial, but I love Elantris. It is so close to my heart. And I do not know a single person because I know a lot of people who've read the Cosmere. I do not know a single person who said Elantris is their favorite. So, that is my ranking of the Cosmere. As you can see, a pretty big ranking, and I still have more books to read, and of course, Brandon's my favorite author, so I can't wait to read more from him. Let me know what your ranking is. Am I crazy for putting Elantris as my number 1, or for putting Way of Kings as my number 5? Tell me what you think in the comments down below. Please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and click the update button. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.